Imagine living in a society where they have to cut off the one thing that makes you a man. Well, eunuchs, or castrated men, have played important cultural roles in societies throughout history in a number of cultures. Eunuchs were an essential part of the imperial court in China, particularly imperial China, but how did this custom originate? What were their functions, and how did they change throughout time? In this documentary we will describe the eunuch system's role in Chinese history and the strange sad reality of eunuchs. The 5 punishments are the 5 distinct penalties that were typically imposed on criminals in ancient China. These included castration, the death penalty, and the amputation of certain body parts. Those accused of crimes like treason or adultery were subject to this final punishment, known as kung. At first, eunuchs were frequently used as free labor or as slaves in the homes of wealthy people. Ancient records from the 8th century BC highlight their employment in the court in large construction projects, such as the massive mausoleum of China's first emperor, Sincho Huang. However, their position really became notable during the renowned Han period. Young lads from barbarian peoples who were captured during operations in border provinces frequently served as eunuchs in the imperial court. Local lads were castrated and sent to work in the palace when the conquest was over because they were not allowed to have children of their own and might have started a competing family to the ruling one or interfere with the monarch's wives. Over time, they developed into dependable servants assigned to administrative duties. As the Han Dynasty developed, their presence in the palace soon became commonplace. Eunuchs were appointed to increasingly powerful political roles, which increased their power and influence over the emperors. During Emperor Ling of Han's decadent reign, the eunuch came to influence numerous state issues, marking the beginning of the first eunuch era during the 1st century AD. The first group of eunuchs gained popularity. They were referred to as the 10 attendants even though they had 12 members. These eunuchs gained increasing authority over the years while the Han Empire was gradually disintegrating by successfully overthrowing rival officials, including significant generals and ministers. They bolster their autocratic status and embezzle a great deal of riches by abusing their power and influence. The Yellow Turban Rebellion began as a result of the 10 Attendants Acts, which unavoidably further shook governmental affairs. Emperor Ling became ill in 189 and passed away too soon at the age of 33. His 13-year-old son succeeded him. Under the regency of General Cardin and Empress Dowager, who were antagonistic to the eunuch party attempting to hold onto power, Liu Bian was crowned emperor. Christine was successfully assassinated by the 10 attendants. His passing shortly after, as a well-respected military commander, solidified anti-eunuch sentiment. The 10 attendants' authority came to an end when a number of warlords and generals attacked the palace and slaughtered every eunuch they could locate. But after the Han Dynasty fell and the Three Kingdoms era began, these circumstances paved the way for the dictator Don Dran to take control. In the centuries that followed, the country was divided into numerous minor kingdoms and small dynasties, marking the end of the first eunuch era. Usually, eunuchs are given very little authority, maybe because they are aware of the dangers that eunuch factions may provide. Under the magnificent Tang Dynasty, which ruled over numerous neighboring states, China was fully reunited in the 7th century. Eunuchs would reappear in politics with the establishment of a sizable and potent imperial court. In 784, court eunuchs were given complete leadership of one of its strongest forces, the Chancellortun or Army of Divine Strategy, which was based in and around the city. During the 9th century, they used this military force as a base from which to progressively seize control of the Tang courts. Eunuchs were able to accumulate and preserve power as the Tang emperors progressively abandoned interest in state matters. Emperor Wanzhong, with the help of his most trusted advisor, Chancellor Li Sun, and physician Yung Zhu, conspired against the eunuchs in late 835 after discovering how much imperial authority had been lost to them. The goal was to bring the Tang Dynasty back to its heyday. They intended to destroy the eunuch faction first. Chancellor Li quickly chose to disregard the prearranged strategy and took the initiative, killing them before restoring territory that had been lost to the Tibetan Empire and fighting in the north, maybe to maintain the glory for himself. He dispatched soldiers to kill the eunuchs during a gathering when a large number of them were present. However, the scheme was unsuccessful because, according to folklore, a wind gust opened a gate, revealing soldiers prepared to act. After that, after capturing Emperor Wantong, the eunuchs realized the trap and largely escaped. They then claimed that Li Sun had rebelled and sent the army of divine strategy to massacre Li Sun's forces, all of his supporters, and other officials who were not in their favor in a massive purge that killed over 1,000 people. Following the Sweet Dew incident, Emperor Wenzong surrendered all remaining authority to the eunuchs, and Li Sun and Zhengju were put to death. Eunuchs maintained total control of the court and freely chose the successor of each Tang emperor by issuing imperial edicts in the monarch's name. However, as the 9th century went on, the nation was split by rebellions and internal strife among eunuch factions, as well as between military governors and warlords, and the Tang Dynasty eventually fell. Warlord Li Modrun slaughtered the last strong eunuchs of the imperial court in 903. But by that time the country was so divided among warlords that the dynasty only lasted 4 more years, officially ending in 907. The Second Eunuch Age was gone. Similar to the fall of the Han Dynasty, the kingdom was split into little states during the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, which led to the destruction of eunuch rule after the Tang era. Foreign invasions had the ideal opportunity to occur during this civil war. The Khitans created their own Liao kingdom when they swept through northern Chinese states as they moved westward. The Khitans emasculated Han Chinese prisoners of war and captured young boys to serve in their imperial palace, despite the fact that they did not customarily conduct castration because they had their own traditions and customs. However, these eunuchs were primarily lowly servants who did not concurrently occupy powerful positions. In 1960, the Song Dynasty managed to rise further south and quickly overran everything in its path, growing into a very strong state and the Khitan Yal Dynasty's major adversary. Emperor Tutu of Song, its first ruler, Zhao Kuang-yin, forbade eunuchs from being appointed to high political positions because he understood the threat they posed to imperial authority. Later in the Song Dynasty, however, significant and strong eunuchs would still come to prominence. Some, like Zhou Huaitrong, even made unsuccessful coup attempts, while others, like Tang Guan, exemplified Song fidelity. A eunuch, Tang Guan was a trusted general-in-chief and advisor to Emperor Haizong of Song. Because of his skill, he was given great power and honors. When the Song were forced to retreat in the face of the invading Jersey dynasty, which had already vanquished the Khitan Liao, he was given command of Emperor Haizong's personal bodyguards in 1125. China would soon be reunited and temporarily pacified by a final foreign invasion. The relentless Mongol army swept over all the nations in its route from the steppe of Mongolia, quickly creating the Yuan dynasty, which eventually ruled over all of China. They did not, however, adopt hand customs to the same extent as other foreign dynasties. Only a small number of eunuchs held modest posts in the palace throughout the Yuan leadership, and they were mostly utilized as gifts in diplomatic settings. However, as the Yuan dynasty was progressively Sinized, their numbers and power would rise dramatically. Imperial China was yet to see a third eunuch era. The Han and Ming Dynasty, which ended the Mongols in 1368, was the time when eunuchs rose to prominence. Drudi, Hongwu's 4th son, would be an exception to the rule of its first 2 emperors, Janwen and Hongwu, who detested eunuchs and prohibited them from holding any political office. With the help of the disregarded eunuchs, Hongwu's 4th son, Zhu Di, rose up in rebellion and overthrew his nephew, Emperor Jianwen. He would become Emperor Yongle in 1402, the 3rd Ming ruler. He held eunuchs in the highest regard during his rule and gave them important missions to fortify and enlarge the Ming Dynasty. They capture the most well-known among them. Zhonghua, a Wei Muslim who was castrated as a child during the Ming occupation of Yunnan province, would grow up to be a powerful admiral. He became a trusted counselor to the emperor after joining their jungler and making a name for himself. He was then given leadership of troops throughout the Yonggle's operations against Emperor Zhonghuan. He was given the responsibility of heading the Ming treasure expeditions, which were extensive naval explorations that ultimately brought him to East Africa. Since Emperor Yonggle's position was initially precarious, a Christian eunuch under Emperor Yongle would be dispatched to conduct expeditions down the Armor River in order to build and fortify ties with the Cherchean tribes inside the Newark Gun Regional Military Commission. During his early rule, he repressed dissenters and consolidated his political authority. In order to monitor and spy on officials and the general public, he established the Eastern Depot, an intelligence organization and secret police. It was fully administered and operated by eunuchs, sowing the seeds of their political prominence during the Ming Dynasty. Emperor Yonggle's creation of the Forbidden City in Beijing, which he proclaimed the new capital of the empire, was without a doubt his most impressive project. Nguyen, a eunuch castrated during the Ming conquest of northern Vietnam, was largely responsible for designing the enormous complex. In 1420, the Forbidden City was finished and put into use after 14 years of arduous labor. Thousands of palace eunuchs, occupying positions ranging from menial servants to influential royal officials, would thereafter call it home. Yongle intended to give numerous eunuchs important roles because he trusted them. However, the vast majority lacked formal education. In order to prepare them for administrative duties and artistic endeavors in the future, the emperor therefore authorized the establishment of the inner school, an establishment where they would acquire reading and writing skills as well as a general advanced education. In addition to captured foreign eunuchs and eunuchs given as tributes, a great number of local Han Chinese were voluntarily castrated to serve in the palace, either as boys on their parents' decision or as adults. Motivation behind this choice was often material, as serving in the Ming Dynasty's Forbidden City guaranteed good living conditions and the possibility of distinguishing oneself, therefore making a fortune and acquiring significant political power. If occasionally emasculated at home in order to receive unique service, candidates would normally see Daozi Zhang, a skilled castrator who demanded a high price for his services. Once on the operating table, the Daozi Zhang would provide medical care for his client's recuperation in the weeks that followed and guarantee a seamless and expert procedure. Before using a specialized knife to perform the castration, the specialist asked the client to clarify once more that this was his desire. With the help of his apprentices, the Daozi Zhang would make 1 or 2 clean cuts that would chop off the candidate's manhood and testicles together. In order to keep the applicant from urinating, the incisions were subsequently securely wrapped for 3 days. Following this rigorous test, the bandages were taken off. If the applicant was able to urinate after the healing procedure, it would demonstrate that there had been no blockage and that his safety was virtually assured. If not, he was in danger of dying. According to reports, this only happened to roughly 1 out of every 50 candidates, but the wounds had fully healed after 3 to 4 months on average. After that, new eunuchs might apply to work in the palace and, if chosen, would undergo a rigorous training program with their more seasoned peers. Each eunuch wanted to be buried like a complete man, even though they would spend the remainder of their lives emasculated. As a result, their organs were meticulously preserved and put in a container. This item was used to identify eunuchs in the palace and had to be given for promotions once the castrator affixed their name to it. It was not unusual for some eunuchs to own counterfeit containers. They performed as musicians and dancers, mostly to amuse imperial concubines in the harem, but they also lost their own duties to which palace eunuchs were assigned, which included manual labor like cooking and gardening as well as secretarial and administrative work, which they served and managed. As the Ming Dynasty flourished, the number of eunuchs serving in the palace increased constantly, reaching dozens of thousands, and some eunuchs even started working for well-known families on a private basis. The Third Eunuch era would result from the presence of strong and important eunuchs, since eunuchs raised the infant sons of Ming emperors. In 1505, they could make sure the future emperor would support them or possibly be influenced by them. 8 Tigers, a powerful group of eunuchs. At the young age of 14, Prince Zhu Holzhou succeeded his father, Emperor Hongzhu, as Emperor Zhengdu. He actually trusted eunuchs over court officials because he was raised by them and spent his entire life in their company. In addition, it quickly became apparent that Zhengdu had no interest in politics, so a group of 8 eunuchs were given the authority to run state affairs. Under the leadership of a Lu Jin, would quickly seize power and earn the moniker, 8 Tigers. Realizing how despotic the situation was becoming, prominent officials, including members of the Grand Secretariat, the highest institution of the Ming Dynasty, and even other eunuchs, made a general plea to the emperor to remove them from power. They did this by using their influence and the teen emperor's blessings to place their supporters in important positions while expelling their rivals. This allowed them to quickly gain complete control over the Forbidden City, the secret police, and even the army the following year, in 1506. However, the emperor declined to punish the 8 Tigers. As a result, their authority was validated, and other court officials quit. The eunuchs' retaliation against the officials was orchestrated by the despotic Liudin, who led the 8 Tigers. An enraged prince of the imperial family even started a rebellion, which would fail because the eunuch controlled the army, to ensure that the motions stripped him of all titles or even tortured and killed him as his reign of terror continued. However, because it caused internal conflict among the 8 Tigers, the source of his strength would also be the source of his downfall. Emperor Yungkook Liu's purported assassination plots were revealed by a furious rival eunuch. He persuaded the emperor to have Liudin caught and sentenced to lynchur, the notorious death by 1,000 slashes, which is said to have lasted for 3 days until the head tiger finally passed away, in order to put his own grandnephew on the throne. Until Zhengda's death in 1521, the remaining 7 tigers maintained a considerable amount of authority before being removed from office. Georgian would not be the most powerful eunuch in Chinese history. At the age of 15, Prince Zhu Yurjia was crowned Emperor Cixi, approximately a century after the 8 Tigers' tenure. The young king was infamously illiterate, most likely as a result of a learning handicap, and he also developed a disinterest in official issues, choosing instead to engage on woodworking and carpentry projects. Later, a eunuch named Wei Dong and his faithful witness, Madame Kerr, were able to gain authority by using their influence over him. They strengthened their position by swiftly purging their opponents. To the extent of virtually uncontested authority accusing Wei Zhongxian of numerous horrible acts, a strong Confucian party in the court begged them to remove him from office. The eunuch and witnesses' influence was solidified, and the authorities failed to persuade the emperor, just as they had with Emperor Zhengda. As a purging and show to other authorities who were waiting, and then had the faction's leaders tortured to death. For almost 10 years, the eunuch would rule unchallenged as a virtual emperor, accumulating immense wealth and power and even having temples erected in his honor throughout the nation. When Tianxi, the helpless emperor, passed away with Atenair in 1627, his brother Julio Jian succeeded him as Emperor Trung Chun. Numerous authorities sent tributes to the new leader right away, demanding that the eunuch be removed from office immediately. Trung Chun eventually gained enough self-assurance to have Wei Zhongxian removed of all his titles, and Wei Zhongxian would shortly commit suicide rather than endure more punishment. About 70,000 royal eunuchs remained in the Forbidden City after the Ming Dynasty collapsed in 1644, and the Manchu conquerors of that dynasty succeeded it. The Qing Emperor Chongzhong would be the last Ming ruler to rule Beijing. However, the Manchus, who had their own traditions and style of governance and were aware of the problems the eunuchs had produced throughout the Ming Dynasty, had a deep mistrust of them. The number of palace eunuchs was drastically reduced to roughly 1,000 by the Qing authorities, who were led by Dorgan. Additionally, their duty was diminished to a simple manual labor far from political positions. Nonetheless, Dorgan died in 1650 reportedly of a hunting accident. Rivals of his faction in the court subsequently sought to destroy his influence and gradually transfer power to teenage Emperor Xuanzhu. In this power struggle, Palace eunuchs headed by Wu Yongfu were able to reclaim some power by participating in the destruction of Dorgan's faction, and Emperor Kondru were able to take over the government. The young monarch would thereafter trust eunuchs quite deeply, and Wolyang became his favorite advisor. Instead of using Manchu officials to handle their 13 political offices, the eunuch persuaded Empress Unji to do so. Eunuchs' resurgent power over court politics would not endure for very long. The 13 officers were disbanded and Wu Yongfu purified following Chandra's untimely death in 1661. Once more, eunuchs were reduced to palace servants, leading submissive and obedient lives. One exception did exist, though, as the succeeding emperors had a deep interest in Tibetan Buddhism. The exceptional position of eunuch lama was created, and 18 eunuch lamas would thereafter serve in the Forbidden City, essentially acting as the imperial household's private priests, a privileged and envied position nonetheless. That Xing took no chances with palace eunuchs. Their conditions, although good, depended on absolute obedience for decades until potentially being granted retirement on the event of a eunuch escaping from the Forbidden City. He would be sentenced to 2 months of imprisonment and a beating of 20 blows. A second desertion would see the eunuch placed in the uncomfortable Kong for 2 months straight. Finally, the third time, deserters were banished to Mukden, the capital of Manchuria, for harsh service during 2.5 years before their return to work in Beijing. Other offenses, such as neglect of duty, would result in heavy beatings in 2 sessions separated by 3 days, causing extreme pain. However, if a eunuch was found guilty of such crimes as theft of an object personally belonging to the emperor, he would be immediately sentenced to death by public beheading. During the reign of Emperor Qianlong in the Golden Age of the Haitian era, the Forbidden City became a particularly vibrant palace. Subsequently, the number of palace eunuchs was raised to 3,100 around the year 1750 to cater to its functioning at its peak during the Qing Dynasty. After this date, as the dynasty would gradually decay, the number of palace eunuchs slowly dwindled. The nation faltered significantly during the 19th century, a period during which prominent eunuchs became infamously corrupt and more powerful. In 1861, Empress Dowager also seized power in a time of great chaos as a woman. Despite being in control of the nation, she could technically not access all parts of the Forbidden City. Therefore, to run the complex and oversee everything within, so she began using a network of eunuchs, who became her ears, eyes, and hands. And the chief eunuch Andahai developed a strong personal relationship with the Emperor Dowager and was subsequently entrusted with a lot of power. He was sent on a mission to Nanjing in 1869, during which he traveled with a public display of imperial authority and supposedly extorted local officials along the way. And Dahai was, however, arrested and publicly killed by the governor of Shandong province. In a power battle between the Empress Dowager and Yixin, the Prince Gong, her ally turned enemy. One last significant eunuch of Chinese history would arise. The chief eunuch's post was now unfilled. 1. Li Lianying, a helpless eunuch, cleverly studied hairdressing and quickly became a specialist. The Empress Dowager then chose Li Lianying to be her personal hairdresser. He quickly won Cixi over with his skill and ability to keep her entertained during conversations. Because of his official position and personal relationship with the Empress Dowager, eunuch Lilian Ying was able to serve as a go-between for authorities who wanted to communicate with her in secret. He then accepted numerous bribes in exchange for praising them and giving them access to the Empress Dowager or the Forbidden City as a whole. Li Lianying was granted permission to retire and spend the remainder of his life in excellent health upon Cixi's death in 1908. The end of an era. Even while palace life appeared to have stayed unaltered, the Qing Dynasty was already in danger of falling apart because its people detested it and it had grown outdated. Emperor Puyi, at 6 years old, abdicated in early 1912 as a result of the Xinhua Revolution in 1911. The Republic of China replaced the imperial system that had existed for millennia. However, the abdication's conditions permitted the king and the imperial court to stay in the Forbidden City, but without any real governmental authority. The imperial court continued to sometimes hire eunuchs in the Forbidden City, despite the Republic's new restrictions. By this point, their numbers had dropped to a third of what they had been during the Haitian period. One such example was Sun Yaoding, who was to be the last imperial eunuch in the history of China. The son of a destitute family, he had been castrated at home in 1911 at 8 years old in the hopes of him becoming a palace eunuch. In 1917, 15-year-old Sun Yaoding successfully found employment in the Forbidden City. By then, with the child emperor powerless and the last prominent figures of the imperial courts dying or retiring, palace eunuchs' respective authority began to disappear. To enrich themselves, eunuchs started stealing artifacts and furniture of the Forbidden City accumulated during the past 6 centuries to sell them on the markets of Beijing as a result of teenage Emperor Puyi, advised by his Scottish tutor Sir Reginald Fleming Johnston, ordered an inventory of the Forbidden City's collections to be made to monitor and prevent theft. But in 1923, the palace that was hosting the inventory had been shot at by the eunuchs. 1,000 eunuchs were forced to fend for themselves on the streets of Beijing after the infuriated 18-year-old emperor decided to remove almost all of the remaining eunuchs from the Forbidden City in a grandiose event to hide their misdeeds. Sun Yat-sen was one of only a few dozen trusted palace eunuchs permitted to stay for maintenance. However, there was just not enough personnel to maintain the majority of the Forbidden City's areas open, thus they had to be shut down. In the midst of the warlord era, General Feng Yuxiang expelled the imperial court from the Forbidden City. Although impoverished, Puyi was reinstated as a puppet emperor by the Japanese in Manchuria in the 1930s. The majority of the remaining eunuchs would subsequently return to civilian life, with a very small percentage continuing to serve the court in exile. His court would be dismantled in 1945, and only a small number of former eunuchs would serve there, briefly including Sun Yaoding. The last imperial eunuch, Sun Yaoding, outlived all his contemporaries and visited the Forbidden City one more time in 1995. China's unethical system came to an end in 1995. Even though China was largely helpless and had a bad reputation throughout history, its immoral system came to an end, since the closest members of the imperial household surely influenced the very path of history. Chinese eunuchs were sometimes able to exert a significant effect on the politics of the empire or even take total control of their position in imperial China. Thanks for watching. Remember to support, please subscribe.